has declared he should have invaded Ukraine earlier, but insists the long-running conflict has strengthened his country. He was asked about the conflict during his annual televised question and answer session, which is a highly choreographed show dubbed Results of the Year with Vladimir Putin. He continued to describe the war as a special military operation. It was launched in February 2022, 8 years after Russia seized Crimea from Ukraine and illegally annexed it.
The decision, which was made at the beginning of 2022, it should have been made earlier. And we should have simply started preparing for these events, including the special military operation. After all, the Crimean events, they were simply spontaneous. We've also started actions in 2022 without any special preparation. But why did we start? Because it was no longer possible to stand still and tolerate.
It's been a brutal 3 years of combat for both sides. Moscow has been making territorial gains in Ukraine and now controls about a fifth of the country. But it's had to fend off Kyiv's forces on its own soil after they launched a surprise incursion across the border. Mr. Putin described the killing of a top general this week as a major blunder by Russia's security agencies. He says he's willing to discuss the war with the US President-elect Donald Trump and is also open to peace talks with Ukraine, providing it drops its bid to join NATO.
We have no preconditions. We are ready to conduct a dialogue without preconditions, but on the basis of what we agreed on during the negotiation process in Istanbul at the end of 2022 and based on the realities that are developing on the ground today.
It was a marathon 4-hour session before the cameras. Mr. Putin stated he hadn't yet spoken to the deposed Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, a long-time ally who's now been granted asylum in Moscow after rebels toppled his government. The Russian leader insists the fall of the Assad regime is not a defeat for the Kremlin.
We maintain relations with all the groups that control the situation there, with all the countries in the region. The overwhelming majority of them tell us that they would be interested in our military bases remaining in Syria.
The Russian president also took questions on domestic issues, insisting the economy was stable despite an alarming inflation rate above 9%. He kept spruiking Russian sovereignty while facing increasing isolation from the West over the war in Ukraine. Mr. Putin, who's been in power for almost a quarter of a century, seemed to jokingly taunt Kyiv's allies with Moscow's new Oreshnik hypersonic missile, which Russia first used last month to strike Ukraine.
Let's say a high-tech duel of the 21st century. Let them determine some target for destruction, say in Kyiv. Concentrate all their air defence and missile defence forces there, and we will strike there with Oreshnik and see what happens.
That remark has outraged the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. He was in Brussels, seeking support from European Union leaders for more aid. Mr. Zelensky says Kyiv needs security guarantees, ultimately by joining NATO.
We need to understand that we cannot live with a frozen conflict. When it comes to a ceasefire in any war, people need to know what will happen next, how it will end. We need to know that tomorrow in order to act today. That is why Ukraine needs security guarantees, a strong position for Ukraine. Ukraine wants the war to end. We want peace, lasting peace. Russia doesn't want this, as it constantly